Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take the sources you send us and, well, really get into them, pull out the key ideas.
Exactly.
And today, we're tackling something pretty central for anyone interested in Buddhism. The Buddha's own early teachings, the ones you find in the suttas.
That's right. Our mission really is to explore why you might want to focus on these original words and maybe offer a few pointers on how to navigate, the huge amount of Buddhist material out there.
It really is vast.
It is. And it's actually quite remarkable, isn't it, that we even have access to teachings from, what, over 2,500 years ago?
It's incredible when you stop and think about it.
Especially when you look around today, you see so many different teachers, monks, nuns, lay people teaching, which is great, of course. But it makes you wonder, how often do you hear someone explicitly say, I take the Buddha himself as my teacher?
That's a really sharp question.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, doesn't the validity, the authenticity of any Buddhist path ultimately have to connect back to the source, back to what the Buddha actually taught?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
And that's what our sources seem to be pointing towards, that maybe without getting to grips with those early suttas yourself, you're missing a crucial reference point. How do you know if what you're practicing is really it?
Right.
And there's this fascinating prediction the Buddha supposedly made. It's an AN 5.79, the Future Peril Sutta. He apparently foresaw a time when people would get more excited about, like, poets, outsiders, even his own disciples.
Yeah, his own core teachings.
Exactly, that they'd turn away from the really profound stuff, the teachings on emptiness, in his own words.
Wow. That's a bit uncanny, actually, because looking at the scene today, you do often see a huge emphasis on specific teachers, specific interpretations.
It's true. It's almost like the analogy of exploring the branches and leaves, maybe getting lost in them, instead of tracing back to the root of the tree.
So why do you think that happens? Is it just easier to connect with a living person?
That's probably a big part of it, yeah. A living teacher offers immediacy, personal guidance. Maybe tackling ancient texts just feels more daunting at first.
Could be.
But it's worth noting there is a positive shift happening. Our sources mention this too. In many places, there's a real return to the suttas. Books just presenting the suttas are becoming, like, bestsellers.
That's encouraging, a desire to get back to the source.
Definitely. And it helps to understand the historical reasons why the focus shifted away in the first place.
Like the language barrier.
Precisely. For centuries, these key texts were mainly in Pali, or maybe Sanskrit, ancient Chinese. Languages most people, even many monks and nuns, couldn't read directly.
So access was really limited?
For like 2,000 years, yeah.
Yeah.
It was basically a small group of specialists who could engage directly. Everyone else, they had to rely on interpretations, on what was passed down through particular traditions.
Which naturally led to different schools, different emphases.
Right. And the teacher, the interpreter, became absolutely central. They were the bridge, the authority figure for most people.
Makes sense. But it's fascinating, isn't it, that the Buddha himself apparently addressed this. Our sources mention MN 139, where he basically said the Dhamma should be taught in the local language.
Exactly, and whatever language people actually speak and understand. Sinhala in Sri Lanka back then, English for English speakers now. The principle holds.
Yet sometimes even modern translations can feel a bit formal, like they're trying too hard to sound ancient, using lots of Pali terms.
Yeah, you see that sometimes, that sort of deliberate, almost Victorian English style. Maybe it's meant to give it weight, authority, but it can actually create a barrier, to make it feel less accessible than it probably was originally.
But thankfully, that's changing too. More modern, clearer translations are appearing.
Yes, definitely. And that's really empowering. It lines up with the Buddha's advice and lets people connect more directly, becoming a bit more independent in their understanding, less solely reliant on a contemporary teacher's view.
Which brings us to a key point. The potential downsides of relying only on a teacher.
Right. It's a sensitive area, but important. You might find a teacher who's incredibly inspiring, charismatic. You feel a real connection.
Sure.
But, as the sources point out, those outward qualities don't always guarantee, inner purity or a perfect grasp of the path. And if things go wrong, it can lead to real disappointment, even a loss of faith.
That's a serious risk.
And there's another angle, too. Even with the best intentions, a teacher's particular take, their emphasis, might subtly diverge from what the Buddha taught. It might not actually lead to the kind of peace or the ultimate goal that the suttas describe.
And those differences could be hard to spot.
Very subtle sometimes. How would you really, without having that baseline, that reference point in the Buddha's own words? The suttas should be the final check, the standard.
Okay, so if we can't put all our trust in one individual teacher, Where do we place our trust, our refuge? This brings us to the triple gem, right?
Exactly. Relying solely on one person kind of misplaces the traditional Buddhist refuge. The real refuge is the triple gem. The Buddha, the Dhamma, his teachings, and the Sangha, the community.
And the purpose of taking refuge is?
It's looking for a reliable source of wisdom, solutions to life's messiness, guidance for getting better, for finding a way forward.
So the Buddha,
Mhm.
obviously the historical person isn't here, so we take refuge in.
His teachings, the Dhamma. He actually said this himself before he passed away. The Mahaparinibbana Sutta mentions it. He said the Dhamma should be our teacher after he's gone.
And where do we find the Dhamma most directly?
Back to the suttas again.
Okay. In the Sangha part of the refuge. That's not just any monk or nun we happen to meet.
Traditionally, no. It refers more to the monastic community as a whole. The sources use the term professional Buddhists, those who've dedicated their lives to studying, practicing, preserving the teachings. The expectation is they're well-versed in the Dhamma.
Right. And there's also the Arya Sangha.
Yes, that's a really important aspect. The noble Sangha, those individuals, monastic or lay, who've actually gained direct insight, tasted awakening themselves. Their guidance is incredibly valuable.
But even their understanding, it still points back to the Dhamma.
Ultimately, yes. Their insights confirm and illuminate the Dhamma found in the suttas. So, you see, whichever part of the triple gem you look at, it keeps leading you back to the Buddha's words, to the suttas.
That really clarifies things. It also helps frame how we should approach claims about enlightenment. You hear people say, my teacher is enlightened.
It's common, yeah. But our sources caution that someone else's claim, or even our belief about their attainment, isn't really a reliable yardstick for us.
Because the only person we can be sort of historically certain about
Is the Buddha himself. The whole foundation of Buddhism rests on his awakening.
So his words, the suttas, become the ultimate benchmark, the gold standard.
Pretty much. Any teaching, ancient or modern, should ideally align with, or at least not contradict, the core principles found in the suttas. If it does contradict them, you should probably question it.
Now, this isn't saying living teachers aren't important, right?
Oh, absolutely not. They offer guidance, context, living examples. It's often a powerful mix, that ancient wisdom from the suttas and seeing it lived out by contemporary practitioners. That interplay is vital.
It's just about keeping the priorities right, not letting faith in an individual overshadow the core refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha.
Exactly. Keeping that foundation solid.
And there's something compelling, isn't there, when you see contemporary teachers, people clearly respected for their depth, constantly referring back to those ancient texts.
Yes. It speaks volumes. It shows the timelessness, the culture independence of these core teachings. It's quite different from, say, a guru who seems to operate completely outside of any tradition or lineage.
Where the risk of ego getting mixed in might be higher.
Potentially, yes. When even highly attained masters bow to the tradition, to the Buddha and the suttas, it acts as a kind of safeguard. There's humility there.
There's that great example in the sources linking Ajahn Brahm's story about the Mayan pyramid.
Ah, yes. Seeing the whole layout from the top.
To the Buddha's own simile of climbing the mountain of ignorance in MN 125.
It's a beautiful parallel, isn't it? How deep meditation gives you that overview, changes your whole perspective on reality. Just like the Buddha described, climbing that mountain and seeing things clearly.
And when you see that connection, that resonance between a modern teacher's insight and an ancient simile from the Buddha.
It really strengthens the authority of the teaching, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And your respect for the teacher who embodies that connection, it shows they've genuinely understood something core.
So the suttas actually help us discern. They give us tools to recognize genuine understanding.
I think so. It's not about being judgmental in a negative way, but about making informed choices. Where do you place your confidence? Who do you trust for guidance? The suttas help you develop your own judgment, your own sense of discernment and independence.
Okay, this all sounds great, but there's the elephant in the room. How do we know these suttas are actually, the Buddha's words? How reliable are they after 2,500 years?
That's the crucial question, absolutely. And thankfully, there's been a lot of research on this, especially over the last 150 years or so, much of it academic.
And what does the research show?
What's really striking is how these teachings were preserved independently across different Buddhist schools in different places over huge stretches of time.
You mentioned different languages earlier.
Right. We have collections preserved in Pali, but also in Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit fragments, even bits in Sogdian and Khotanese. all stemming from schools that separated quite early on, probably around the time of Emperor Asoka.
Which was how long after the Buddha?
Only about 150, maybe 200 years after his life, so
Yeah.
relatively close.
And these separate traditions preserved similar teachings.
Remarkably similar. The core doctrines, key similes, often match almost word for word across these independent lines of transmission, like between the Pali Canon and the early Chinese Agmas.
Wow.
The differences are usually in minor details, arrangement, maybe some later additions around the edges. But the consistency of the core is strong evidence that they managed to preserve the teachings very carefully.
So it's not just based on faith. There's actual historical and textual evidence.
Exactly. When you find the same teaching cropping up in multiple independent ancient sources, you can be pretty confident it goes back to the earliest layer, very likely to the Buddha himself. And the consensus among scholars is that the Pali Canon, especially the first four main collections, the Nikayas, represents the most complete and arguably the most original version we have.
Okay, that's reassuring. It puts engaging with the suttas on a much firmer footing.
It really does. And it leads to the next step, actually starting to read them, becoming more independent in your own practice.
Which might feel intimidating. Where do you even begin?
The advice is, just start. Pick up a collection. Don't worry if you don't understand everything immediately. Our sources suggest just skipping bits that feel too difficult and maybe coming back later.
And teachers can still help here.
Oh, absolutely. They can be invaluable for explaining tricky passages, subtle points. Think of them as guides, aids to your own exploration. The goal isn't to replace them entirely, but to shift the dynamic.
Towards more self-reliance.
Exactly. Developing your own ability to read, reflect, and make judgments based on the source texts. There's a real power in feeling that direct connection to the Buddha's words, in feeling like you're truly in charge of your own path.
That sounds very empowering.
It is. And ideally, that's what a good teacher wants too, to help you grow towards that independence.
Now, what about the worry that the suttas might be too, I don't know, elevated, too philosophical or hard for an ordinary person?
That's a common misconception. But remember who the Buddha was talking to. Ordinary people, farmers, merchants, courtesans, kings. People just like those who woke up during his time. The teachings were meant for them, for us.
So they should be understandable.
Largely, yes. Okay, sure, there might be some unfamiliar terms here and there, or repetition that comes from the oral tradition they originated in.
Right, that repetition can be a bit much sometimes.
It can, but teachers can help with the tricky phrases. And actually, that repetition, you can see it as an opportunity, a chance to let the meaning sink in deeper each time.
A different way to read it.
And what often happens is passages will just jump out at you. They'll speak directly to your situation, your struggles. It creates this amazing connection across time.
And they're practical.
Often incredibly practical. Simple, direct advice you can apply to your life right now. Plus, they're often just beautiful to read those similes, the stories, like the mountain one we talked about.
So it's not just study, it's also inspiration.
Definitely. It's spiritual nourishment. Reading the suttas can bring joy, confidence, energy for your practice. And once you have that foundation, listening to talks by contemporary teachers becomes a different experience too. You have a broader context, a deeper framework for understanding what they're sharing.
Okay, so if someone listening wants to start, what's a good entry point? You mentioned collections.
Yeah, starting with a curated anthology is often recommended. Something like Bhikkhu Bodhi's In the Buddha's Words is excellent. It gathers key suttas by theme.
That sounds manageable.
It is. Then, once you feel a bit more grounded, the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses, is a fantastic place to explore further. It has a great range of teachings, from basic ethics to deep meditation.
Read it cover to cover.
Probably not the best way. Better to browse, dip in, read what catches your eye, what feels relevant or inspiring at the moment. Oh, and the Dhammapada. That's another wonderful collection. Short, powerful verses. Great for inspiration.
Good tips. It feels less like a huge mountain to climb that way.
Exactly. Speaking of mountains, there's one final simile from the suttas, from the Kosala Sayutta, that really stuck with me from our sources.
Oh, yeah.
The Buddha is talking to King Pasenadi. He describes messengers coming from all four directions, reporting that massive mountains are rolling in, crushing everything in their path. A terrifying image.
Definitely. What's the king's reaction?
His immediate response is, well, in that case, what else is there to do but live righteously, live according to the Dhamma, do good deeds?
Wise king.
And the Buddha confirms his wisdom. He then reveals the punchline. Those mountains, they're rolling in, their old age and death, relentlessly approaching every single one of us.
Wow. That lands hard.
It does. And the Buddha reinforces the king's conclusion. Given that reality, the only truly appropriate response is to live by the Dhamma, practice wholesomeness. There's a powerful verse comparing old age and death to these huge, unstoppable mountains grinding down everything.
That image, it really creates a sense of urgency, doesn't it?
For me, it absolutely does. It cuts through the distractions. It makes you ask, what am I doing with this time? Why are we rushing so thoughtlessly towards this inevitable end? How can we best spend the moments we have?
A profound question to sit with.
And that's the power of the suttas. You find these passages that just stop you in your tracks, resonate deeply, and inspire you to practice. They're waiting there for you to discover them.
So the takeaway from this deep dive seems pretty clear. Getting into the Buddha's original words in the suttas offers a path to a deeper, more grounded, more independent understanding of Buddhism.
Absolutely. We really hope we've encouraged you to start that exploration, or maybe to deepen it if you've already begun.
It's like you said, the suttas are a treasure house of wisdom.
But the door only opens when you turn the key. So the final thought for you is, now that you know this treasure is available, this direct link to the Buddha's insights, what will you discover when you open it?